What if I told you that some simple test data at Monza has completely shocked Nico Rosberg to the point of suggesting that Ferrari could have found something that changes the entire season? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Because what Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton did on that filming day is not normal. It is not sensations. It is not smoke. It is data that is beginning to worry the rest of the grid a lot. And when someone like Rosberg reacts like that, it's because what he saw in those numbers shouldn't be happening. At least not yet. What is happening at Ferrari cannot be understood without looking at the full context in which this famous Monza filming day takes place, because we are not talking about a team that is naturally on the rise, but rather about a team that has had very serious doubts since the beginning of the season. The reality is that both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were competing with a car that, despite having specific moments of performance, showed a very clear structural weakness compared to Mercedes, especially in one of the most critical aspects of the current regulations: energy management. It was not just a question of top speed, but of how the car delivered that power along the straight, how it maintained it, and above all, how it lost it compared to its direct rivals, something that had already been pointed out internally and also publicly by Hamilton himself after the first races. This deficit generated a chain consequence because it forced Ferrari to compensate in other areas, forcing aerodynamic configurations or strategies that were not always optimal, which ended up affecting both consistency in the race and the real ability to fight for victories. And this is where a key point that often goes unnoticed comes in. Ferrari not only needed to improve, it needed to understand what exactly was failing in its energy management model under the new regulations, where the MGUK has a much greater role than in previous years. We are talking about a system that can now make enormous differences per lap, much more than in past generations, making any adjustment potentially decisive. That is why the choice of Monza was not coincidental, it was a surgical decision. Ferrari brought there a deeply modified car, with changes that did not point to a simple evolution, but rather a reinterpretation of the SF26 concept. And this is what begins to attract attention from outside, because when a team modifies close to 50% of its car in the middle of the season, it is not looking for tenths, it is looking for a radical solution. These types of moves are not made without internal pressure, nor without the feeling that the original project was not working as it should. In this context, the figure of Nico Rosberg becomes even more relevant, because he doesn't look at this type of evidence as an ordinary spectator, but as someone who perfectly understands what certain patterns in the data mean. And what is beginning to emerge from Monza is not simply that Ferrari has improved, but that both Leclerc and Hamilton were consistently finding performance in conditions that previously exposed their weaknesses. This is key because it indicates that the problem was not only being mitigated, but possibly resolved. And here appears the first major point of tension in this act. If Ferrari has really managed to correct its greatest technical weakness, then everything we have seen so far in the season could no longer be a valid reference. Because in Formula One, when a team manages to balance its technical package in critical areas such as energy, the competitive jump is not progressive. It is sudden. And that is exactly what is beginning to be hinted at Monza, which explains why someone like Rosberg is not only surprised, but shocked. Because at that point, what was on the table was no longer a simple upgrade. It was the possibility that Ferrari had unlocked something that completely changed the rules of the game. And this is where the story takes the most important turn, because what really shocked Nico Rosberg was not that Ferrari improved, it was how it improved, and above all, where it did so. Because the data that began to circulate from Monza pointed directly to the heart of the problem that had conditioned the entire season. The delivery and recovery of energy on the straight, that point where the car of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc simply could not compete on equal terms. What begins to change in that test is something that in Formula One is not easily seen from the outside, but that internally changes everything: the efficiency of a hybrid system. Under the current regulations, where the MGUK has an enormous weight with those 350 kilowatts and a brutal energy recovery per lap, it is not enough to have power. You have to know when to use it, how to deploy it, and above all, how to maintain it without collapsing at the end of the straight. And that was exactly the point where Ferrari was steadily losing time to Mercedes. But at Monza, that pattern disappears. The data is beginning to show something completely different, a much more stable delivery, a lower power drop, and most worrying for rivals, a much smarter management of energy deployment. This is not a superficial improvement, it is a complete reconfiguration of the car's behavior in the most sensitive sections of the circuit. And when Rosberg sees that kind of consistency in the numbers, he immediately understands what it means. Ferrari hasn't just found performance, it has found control. And this is where the most powerful element of this entire act comes in, because it's not just about isolated numbers, but about the direct comparison between pilots. What really sets off alarm bells is that both Hamilton and Leclerc were reproducing that performance consistently, regardless of the style differences between them. This is extremely rare, because normally when a car improves, it favors one type of driving more than another. But in this case, that was not happening. This suggests something much deeper. The car has become predictable. And in Formula One, when a car is predictable, the driver can exploit the real limit, not one conditioned by failures or inconsistencies. That's what allows performance to appear repeatedly, lap after lap, without sharp spikes or dips. And that is exactly what the SF26 at Monza begins to reflect. That is why Rosberg's reaction is not a simple surprise, it is a clear reading of the danger. Because he knows that when a team corrects its greatest technical weakness, and also does so in a stable manner, the competitive leap is not measured in tenths, it is measured in hierarchy. It means Ferrari could go from chasing its rivals to putting them under direct pressure in a matter of 1 or 2 races. And here the real conflict of this story is born. Because if these data are real and everything indicates that they are, then the rest of the grid not only has to worry about Ferrari, they have to react immediately. Because what was tested at Monza was not an experimental version without consequences. It was a direct preview of what may appear on the track in the next races. And when that happens, we will no longer be talking about promises or sensations. We will be talking about a real threat. And this is where everything fits, because what seemed like simply a promising test at Monza begins to transform into something much bigger, a direct consequence that can completely change the course of the season. What Nico Rosberg saw is not just an isolated technical improvement, it is the birth of a new competitive scenario where Ferrari stops reacting and starts dictating the pace. Because if there is something that defines this moment, it is that for the first time in a long time, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton's car no longer has an obvious weakness to exploit. And this changes absolutely everything. Until now, rivals knew exactly where to attack Ferrari: on the straight, in energy management, in consistency of deployment. It was a clear, measurable, repeatable vulnerability. But if that disappears, if that hole closes as the Monza data suggests, then Ferrari stops being predictable for others. And when a team stops being predictable, it becomes dangerous. The most important thing about this point is not only the pure performance, but the domino effect it generates throughout the championship. Because from now on, every rival strategy, every configuration, every decision in the race has to take into account a new variable. Ferrari is no longer the team that falls behind on the straights. It can now compete head-to-head. This forces others to leave their comfort zone, to take more risks, to push the limit further. And in Formula One, when you push the limit, errors appear. But there is an even deeper detail that elevates this moment above a simple technical improvement. And Ferrari has not arrived here with a single fit driver, but with 2 completely different profiles who can now exploit the same package. Leclerc with his natural aggressiveness in curves, Hamilton with his management and race reading skills. If they are both getting performance from the same car, it means that Ferrari has not only improved, it has found a balance that can be sustained on any type of circuit. And that's what really sets off all the alarms. Because when Rosberg analyzes this situation, he understands that this is not about a one-off race or even a streak. It's on trend. And the trends in Formula One are those that end up defining championships. If Ferrari confirms on track what it showed at Monza, then the order we thought was established may be broken much sooner than expected. So the big question is no longer whether Ferrari has improved. The real question is, have they arrived too late, or just at the perfect time to change everything? In the end, it all comes down to one idea: what happened at Monza was not a simple test, it was a warning. Because when someone like Nico Rosberg is shocked by some data, it is not for show. It is because he perfectly understands what those numbers mean in the medium and long term within Formula One. Ferrari had been looking for answers for some time, trying to close a gap that seemed structural, a weakness that conditioned every race, every strategy, every result. But what Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have shown in that test completely changes the narrative. We are no longer talking about a team that is trying to get closer. We are talking about a team that could have found the missing piece to compete in total equality. And that's what's really worrying, because if Ferrari confirms this jump on the track, then everything we have seen so far loses value as a reference. Hierarchies change, strategies are rewritten, and favorites are no longer so clear. In a sport where every thousandth counts, solving the biggest problem doesn't bring you closer, it throws you directly into the fight. That is why this moment is so important. because it may be the exact point at which Ferrari stops chasing and starts leading. Now, there's only one thing left to discover. Was Monza the beginning of a silent revolution, or the warning of something that is about to explode on the track? Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.